Okay, it's now 7 o'clock. We do have a quorum, so I'll call the meeting to order. This is January 24th. January 24th, Committee of the Whole, Inuvik Town Council. First item is calling the meeting to order. Adoption of the agenda as presented. I have no additions or deletions. Next item is a declaration of conflict of interest or pecuniary interest. Anybody foresee one? Nothing. Item number 4, 4.1, the Utilidor system presentation. Michael Malte with McElhaney Engineering. Did I get all that right, Mike?
You sure did.
Good. It's all yours.
Thank you. I will share my screen again and just go through an overview. So Rick and Grant have asked me to kind of do a bit of an overview of the Utilidor system. Oops, I think something's going wrong there. Can you guys see that now?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Bit of an overview of the Utilidor system. It's a very similar presentation that I made to council about a year and a half ago. But there's a lot of new councillors this year and a new mayor, so we're going to go through it again. And feel free to ask any questions along the way or at the end. I don't mind when I field them. So what I plan on going over today is why does the town use utilidors? Because it's a pretty unique system, not located in too many places. What the town has been up to since I've been involved. There's been a lot of change in the utilidor system over the last 10 years. Some by me, some by other consultants. Current condition and risks, where we're putting our focus right now, and kind of a look forward of what costs will be for the next 10 to 20 years. And then finally, we're going to talk about this year's project. We've got Dave Brown in the call as well. He's our landscape architect, and he's going to talk about the bridge crossing across Duck Lake and maybe some improvements we can do there if the town is interested. So why utilidors? So the ground in Inuvik is thaw sensitive. It's quite warm permafrost compared to many places in the north, so it is very sensitive to changes and heat sources. So the utilidors are put above ground to protect them from any heat source, particularly sewers and water heat sources. Small variations in the ground temperature could cause all sorts of settlement or heating or any sort of bad impact, and wouldn't just affect the utilidor system, but could affect adjacent buildings and stuff as well. So it's really the whole goal of the utilidor is to keep heat out of the ground. And as you guys probably know, Inuvik's really ice rich as well. There's places in town where it's 10, 14 meters thick of just straight ice. So having infrastructure in that kind of situation would create all sorts of havoc. So the town has been using utilidor since it started and likely will continue for a very long time with utilidors because of the nature of the soils. So what has the town done in the last 10, 15 years is we've built a new water treatment plant, which was a huge improvement to the town's water source. And that was partly allowed because of the year-round water intake that was developed. The outfall to the lagoon has been upgraded. The lagoon has been desludged, but hadn't been done for many years and desperately needed it. The removal of all the CMS utilidors. So the CMS utilidors are those kind of half corrugated shell utilidors. They were sort of put in the 70s and 80s for a cheaper version of the utilidor, and they have not outlasted the more original utilidor design, which stands a testament of how well those original engineers did it. There's a new reservoir in town. It's not quite connected, but it will be shortly. And the town has set up a woodpile preventative maintenance program to extend the life of what the town currently has on wood piles. and is continuing to do that until they are gone. Current condition of the Utilidor and the risks going forward. Talk about the age of the infrastructure, changing conditions of the north in general and the town, and then the risks that all of this poses on the Utilidor system. So some of this old, can you guys see my mouse move if I move it? Maybe not.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So this older system was built in about 1956 to the 1960 kind of range. So you're looking at 72 years of system, which is quite a long time for some of this equipment. Certainly valves are good for 35. Piping is usually in the 75, if not longer, but the conditions in Inuvik is stretching that. Some places you still have wood box utilidors, which are, at risk of rotting away, just like the piles. So there's some concerns there. But the biggest issue of the whole system is really the wood pilings. They are rotten, well past their service life, and the town is the maintenance crew is running it as best they can, patching where they can, fixing on a regular basis, and maintenance is increasing every year because of frost jacking, rot, failures. I think they just had a water break last year, which is largely related to changing, or last night, largely related to failing piles and jacking piles. So what we do now is a sort of a new style, and we've been doing this for well before my time. It's sort of a steel pile and the pipe itself becomes a bridge between steel piles, and it's a fairly robust system in many ways, and it's been treating us quite well in performance. There's only a couple areas in town where it hasn't performed as we expected. The old system is failing in many different ways. Here to the right, you can see some mushroom piles where the rot's gone right through and the pile has collapsed. Here you can see some supports that are starting to rot. There's some concern that rot will continue and there'll be some failures above. Over here, you can see some pipe clamps that have been used in the town to support these piles. The risk with these is they're only good for keeping the piles together, but if there's anything pushing on it like wind, there's a risk that they could push over and fail. And then here, there's just places where things have shifted or jacked or whatever, and the support isn't what it should be. Here's the ugly, which fortunately we have replaced this year, which is, I'm sure, a relief to Rick. When we actually started to demolish this, the hoe just tapped this section of Utilidor and it pretty well fell over with no effort at all. So we're pretty happy it's no longer in service and something new is in place. And here's a picture of what we did last year, where we're new style Utilidor again, and should be good for many, many years to come now. So remaining in the system, there's about 6,200 meters remaining in the system. The yellow here kind of highlights what's still to be replaced. It's all mostly high temp Utilidor, so the old square box style now, which is the oldest of them all, but was still in the best shape as we were going through it. There's a lot of bridges in town. The bridge decks themselves are in fairly good shape and have a fair amount of life. What issues arise with the bridges is the wing walls are failing, the guardrails are a bit rotten, which have been replaced with time, and there's some poor drainage, which creates soil issues in Inuvik. When water stands, it can provide heat into the undergrounding soils, and all sorts of bad stuff can happen. And in a couple places, the wood's rotten under the bridges, and some soil has tried to push through. There's several locations where the town has repaired these to extend the life of the bridge, but the actual bridge decks themselves are all in pretty good shape. There's some more pictures. There's just showing some of the old infrastructure. These valves are so old and rusty. They're 70-year-old valves that some don't even operate or could explode at any time. lately the town's been doing all sorts of work to bypass some of these thrust blocks. They're getting failures in the thrust blocks. They have to put in some expensive piping up and around and back down, tie it to the thrust blocks. So the repair works are getting quite expensive in locations as it ages, and the repairs have to be more and more complicated. Most of the valves, or I would say all the valves, are past their service life in the old Utilidor, and lots of the piping is nearing its life too. Changing conditions, as you guys know, in the north, there's climate change is something that's talked about often. There's some graphical proof that is actually warming up in Inuvik, appears to be about 0.1 degrees per year, which doesn't sound like a lot, but lots of the Utilidor on your ground, it sort of depends on the cold weather. I don't think any of the settlements in Inuvik yet are really related to climate change. They're more likely related to disturbances and clearing of land and whatnot that's happened in Inuvik over the last 7 years. But certainly this is coming on the horizon, and you're seeing degradation of the permafrost from just living there and being around above it. Lots of the problems that the town needs to deal with these days is heaving and leaning of the old Utilidor. You can kind of see this section's actually coming out next year, but there's a big sway on it from the piles leaning and the Utilidor pushing over. This is a big issue because the pipe inside is a asbestos cement pipe. It's not super strong when you start pushing on the joints. So it can take a little bit. There's about a 3-degree deflection allowed in it, but once you exceed that, you're going to get a break. And there has been many breaks in the past. Here on the left, you can kind of see some heaving where the town's cut off a couple sections of pipe sitting on the left here and trying to lower down some of the junction houses that are getting pushed up to try to prevent breaks. As every summer they do a bit of this work so that they can try to avoid breaks in the winter. This bottom picture is a pretty good picture. You can sort of see, if you follow this Utilidor, goes down and up a bit. So there's all sorts of heaves and sagging in there. This causes two issues with the town. It causes settlements, or the flow in the pipe to slow down and sewage to settle out in the pipe, which causes blockages, which causes backups and issues like that. And again, you know, breaking of the pipe, moving in the Utilidor so that there could be breaks all the way along there. So capacity and failures. In recent years, I mentioned a bit before, there's been warming of the permafrost in the town of Inuvik. Traditionally, it used to be in the -2 degrees range pretty consistently. Lately, we've been starting to do geotech when we do these jobs because there's been some warming, and we've addressed it in many jobs in town, and we're not always guaranteed to get the temperatures we used to. So there's been a bit of a design change in the piles. The geotechs are asking them to go in super deep. We've gone more with an adaptive approach to the piles where we can manage the ones that become a problem with future thermal siphons or revision of piles instead of placing all of them at super depths, because the system we put in now is fairly adaptive to movement. We have the option to lower pipes without changing piles out and stuff. So we can probably manage the risk rather than spend the money and putting piles in as deep as the geotechs are starting to say. What else is going on? Just to note, I guess, is Inuvik is in an earthquake zone. Might forget at times that it is. So some of the old sections of pipe are very fragile on their wood structures, very rotten, and an earthquake could have significant consequences if it was of a fair size. And then just in 2015, the town got upgraded into a higher earthquake zone than it was previously. So it means I think the risk has changed. They just look at it differently, and something to be aware of, that an earthquake could hit and you could feel something that would affect the Utilidor. So the risks: Utilidor breaks or collapses, loss of water, loss of sewer service, short-term or long-term. Short-term, the town can manage fairly well, but if we have a long-term break, that's a significant cost and a significant loss of service to the town and their people. And there's a risk because the whole system is circulated. If you get a large break, that you could freeze up sections and lose more pipe than you really intended or wanted to, if the situation, depending on what happens, I guess, right? But the catastrophic failure or collapse of a large section of Utilidor would most certainly be months of outages, depending on where it happened. Capacity and backup issues. Oh, there's so again, we talked about before where the grades changing and there's capacity issues, which has led to some backups in certain places because of this. The section we're currently working on is extremely flat and has had lots of issues over the years, and we'd be pretty happy to have it replaced, trying to get as much grade out of it as we can to improve capacity issues in that section. And maintenance costs have been going up. We're, every year we take stuff out of service, but it doesn't really reduce the cost because everything else seems to have more costs. And eventually we're hoping to get over that curve and maintenance costs come down as well. But as we work forward, the issues just get greater and greater. So where are we looking at right now for our focus? We've done lots of town. The current focus is running this green line. We sort of did this section last year. We're in the progress of doing it. Had a bit of a hiccup last year, so it didn't get quite completed. But we're looking to run it up to the reservoir. This is sort of the last critical section in the system. It allows the loop to be finished in town, so that if there was a failure in the section, the main loop would still be in function and less service would be lost. If this section was to fail or break while we work on it, the whole town could lose water supply, because this is the line that feeds the reservoir from the water treatment plant. So currently we've designed up to this corner, currently designing up to this corner, and then we'll focus up onto here next. This last section here, we're looking at maybe an option to reduce costs and not use Utilidor, because grade isn't as important on it, and sort of an on-ground piping instead of an on-pile. We'll see where we get when we actually get to the design there. But yes, this connects some major components: reservoir, treatment plant, power plant, hospital, the Midnight Sun complex. So all really critical facilities for the town. Cost to do that section, when we ran the numbers a year ago or so, it was about $20 million. It's probably still in that range. There has been some significant cost increases in steel over the last 2 years, as well as plastic. Not that we use a lot of plastic in our system. Certainly there's going to be inflationary pressures on this going forward. And then cost to replace the whole system is about $80 million to finish all wood piles in the town. And this is a bit of an example of what a spend would look like to get it all done. At the current rate of $3.5–4 million a year, you're looking at 20 years to finish it off. And if we can get some grant funding, hopefully we can accelerate that into 10 years. And that's a quick overview of the Utilidor. Is there any questions before we move on to the this year's project?
Any questions? Okay.
Stop sharing and I'll invite Dave Brown to talk about what we're proposing at Duck Lake. You there, Dave?
I think everyone can hear you now.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Working my way around the buttons, and everyone should be able to see my screen. I believe. Correct?
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, thanks. So as part of the system that Mike was just talking about, we do have a bridge crossing over Duck Lake Road. So Mike asked me to maybe look at ways in which we might be able to enhance that bridge crossing, being that it is a fairly important route, between the main part of town and the river. So so we just went through a bit of a sketch exercise, looking at the bridging. Sorry, I'm having problems with. All right. So as part of the sketch exercise, what we looked at was the Utilidor structural steel frame. Also, in conjunction with the bridging, there was the idea of having a separate pedestrian path along Duck Lake Road, and looking at the way in which we could actually maybe introduce some separation devices between that pedestrian path and the road. And then also, as people would know, there are some vehicle clearance bars that sit in advance of on both sides of the bridging that could we looked at as well. So some of the things that we looked at in this sort of sketch exercise, there were a couple of options. One was doing some form of laser cut steel or aluminum, or looking at maybe display boards, doing wood, or banner systems. There are a number, as we sort of entered into some of the sketch design, working with Mike and working with our structural engineer, we also sort of went through some key design considerations that would need to be taken into consideration with each of the options that could potentially be developed as part of the bridge. I think all of them have really a lot of importance in moving forward. One that we felt was really the most important, which was sort of emphasized in sort of the presentation back to the town, was ensuring that there was community engagement and inclusion in if the town and council decide to do something a little bit different on this bridging, that they'd be part of sort of the artwork and messaging developed. As part of the design process, some of the key things that we wanted to do was create an opportunity to sort of celebrate community and sense of place. Ensure that we're introducing some essence and theme into the design of the bridge, and as I mentioned before, trying to establish a community-led process. So looking at the options, the considerations, the design, and one of the things that came out of our discussion with the town in around Christmas time there was sort of the level of permanence versus interchangeability that this opportunity creates. So, for example, a more permanent structure would be sort of the laser cut steel or aluminum installation, where we would sort of establish sort of the design parameters in advance for or a community or artist-led application onto the bridge. Something that was a little bit more interchangeable, such as the display boards, which would be similar to any advertisement boards or those types of things. We would sort of establish the panel format and details for adding that to the bridge, and then leave it to sort of the town and this sort of community artist approach to sort of establish some interchangeable art pieces, as I said, just very much like a commercial billboard that could be sort of year-round developed and themed. So just to sort of show the process or the design process, we've sort of established some really quick sketches of some of the sort of essence and theme ideas that could be established for a more permanent installation. So, this one was just taking an air photo of sort of the Mackenzie River and Delta and creating a much more sort of artistic sort of mosaic application to the bridge. Or, looking at something like ducks, given it's Duck Lake Road, as an application. The other one I came up with was Arctic char, or, of course, the big one up in Inuvik is the caribou. And then also, something along the line, more of a community-based theme, playing on the river's edge, that would, as I said, build in some community-based, artist-based design. And then during our discussion with the town there at Christmas time, we also sort of quickly put together sort of this overlay, which would say, as I said, the idea of establishing a sort of a display board system, and then this creates sort of a canvas for producing sort of interchangeable color fused images onto that panel board system. The other two items, as I said, was the pedestrian path and separation devices. Some of the design options we talked about and presented were concrete barriers, post and art screens, and sort of unique sort of vertical fence and barriers. It led to some discussion regarding how the pedestrian pathway was to be constructed. And so I think that, the intent would be is if the pedestrian walk goes ahead, we'll be looking at a little bit more detail with regards to the pathway design and materials, the grading, and the interface with the actual road. And then with regards to the vertical clearance bars, we just sort of talked about the addition of some color variations and the opportunity to actually do, once again, sort of an artist-led opportunity for adding motifs or decals to the vehicle clearance bars. And that's my overview. Are there any questions?
Questions? Okay, seeing none. Thank you very much for the presentations, gentlemen. We look forward to seeing the work being done. Thank you. Next item on the agenda is public question period. Grant, were there any public questions?
I have not received any.
Okay, thank you. Item 6.1, adoption of the minutes of the January 10th and 12th, 2022 council meetings. Everybody's had a chance to review them. Any questions, corrections? Seeing none. Item 7, action items list. Any questions? No questions. 8.1, 2022 property tax auction. Our motion is, be it resolved that in accordance with the Property Assessment and Taxation Act, Inuvik Town Council will auction specified properties at the Town Council Chambers or Midnight Sun Complex at 9 a.m. on Thursday, March the 3rd. The minimum sale price shall be 50% of the assessed value as listed for each property. Each property shall be auctioned on the condition that taxes are 2 years in arrears at the time of the auction. The list is attached. Any questions? I'll look for a mover and seconder on Wednesday. 8.2, appointment of an auctioneer for public auction of properties. The motion will be it resolved that Inuvik Town Council hereby appoints Ms. Chitty Amobi as the auctioneer for the 2022 tax auction scheduled for March the 3rd, 2022, as per the requirements of the Property Assessment and Taxation Act. Any questions? Next item. The bylaws, 9.1. The solid waste levy bylaw, third and final reading. I believe you're all familiar with this one from our last set of meetings. Any questions? 9.2, the water and water and sewer utility rates bylaw, third and final reading. Any questions? 9.3 is first and second reading, a bylaw to appoint a director of finance. And this is in order to formalize the hearing of our director of finance, Chitty Amobi. Council must appoint her to the position by bylaw. Proposed appointment bylaws attached. Any questions on that? 9.4, the interim tax billing bylaw. As per the provisions of the Property Assessment and Taxation Act, council may pass a bylaw to establish an interim tax levy not exceeding 50% of the previous year's taxes. Be it resolved that Inuvik Town Council hereby gives first reading to bylaw 2680 tax 22, the 2022 interim tax billing bylaw, and second reading of the same bylaw. Any questions? 9.5 is property class bylaw. The only change is an addition or inclusion of an undeveloped residential category, which we didn't have before. First and second reading. Any questions? $9.6 is a new proposed installment tax payment plan bylaw. It was reviewed at the January 19th bylaw review committee meeting. The only recommended change was to update the legislative references. And it will repeal the existing installment tax payment plan bylaw 92-1220. Any questions? Thank you. 9.7, a new proposed bylaw to provide property tax exemptions for churches. Again, that was cleaning up the replacing existing bylaw and updating the legislative references. First and second reading on Wednesday. Any questions? 9.8. Repeal a number of bylaws no longer have any force or effect. These include bylaws for property tax forgiveness where the debt has already been written off. And in one case, the town has repaid the funds borrowed for construction of the Inuvik Family Center. There's a total of 4 bylaws that will be repealed. Any questions? You. 10.1, department head reports, economic development and tourism report. I just want to mention the excellent job that Jackie and everybody else associated with the Sunrise Festival did such an excellent job. Public Works was involved, tourism, our municipal enforcement people, the fire department, and I'm sure I'm forgetting a lot of people, but I want to say a real thank you for a job well done. Any questions on economic development and tourism report? Thank you. 10.2, Director of Public Works, monthly report for December. Any questions? 10.3, Protective Services for the same period, December. Any questions on that one? 11.1 information items is council priorities. This will come up at our strategic planning session, so it's probably going to change right away. Any questions? No? 11.2 are research licenses through the Research Institute for information only. 11.3 are the meeting notes from the Bylaw Review Committee. Anybody have any questions on those? Okay. Next item, council concerns. Any concerns tonight? Seeing none. We have no in camera tonight, so I'll look for a motion to adjourn. Motion to adjourn. Councillor Galloway.
Mexican standoff here.
Yeah, I noticed that. All in favor?